What if I told you that I knew not only who this is, but what this suspicious mound of dirt behind the Afton house truly holds? Bear with me here, because we're in for a ride. Hello, Internet, and welcome to... probably shouldn't use that one. Howdy, folks. It's me, Aaron. This is the first video back on YouTube since my childhood, and of course, it would be a video about FNAF. Let me be clear with something first. With my timeline of events comes inconsistencies. There is really no good way to explain the series timeline in a way that makes total, coherent sense across the board, but I've done my best. Once you get past this first big leap of logic, things mostly make sense. I know that what I'm about to tell you is crazy. Not Mrs. Afton running the entirety of Fazbear Entertainment crazy, but nearly on that level. No shade to MatPat, just poking a little fun. I'll do my best at the end of this to explain where and how I've gotten my years for the events listed, and if you disagree with me, that's great, because I'm probably wrong, to be honest. I'd love to hear your opinions and theories in the comments. Starting off, I have no idea how Henry and William began working together, nor am I going to take stabs in the dark at it trying to figure it out with the literally zero information that I have. So, I'm going to start in 1983, after William and Henry have been working together for a while and have opened Fredbear's Family Diner. William keeps trying his hand at making animatronics, but can never quite reach the level of quality that his partner Henry could achieve with so little effort. William is disheartened by his lack of animatronic prowess, but is still good enough at tinkering to come up with a few things. He envies Henry's engineering capability and searches for a way that he can close the gap. So, he begins work on a type of illusionary device that can give the impression of a true fictional character standing before you. To make up for his lack of skill in animatronic building, he creates the very first illusion discs. He was so obsessed with making the perfect character come to life that he would sink hours and hours into these devices. Unfortunately, because these illusion discs were auditory in nature, they naturally caused some discomfort for William's children in the house, given that children can hear frequencies of higher capacity. It had gotten so bad that his youngest son began complaining about nightmares and hallucinations. William was truly obsessed with making the perfect device, so much so that he would rarely leave his workshop, and this upset his wife considerably. One day, he was dressed in the spring Bonnie suit. He was trying to tweak a few things about it and test how the discs could work with the suit to amplify the realism of the character. To some degree, his suit also brought him comfort. He was truly proud of that thing. One of the few things he was able to make. It was a fairly basic animatronic, but the simplicity of its mechanisms made it far easier to compress into a wearable form. It's around this time that Miss Afton barges into the room. She starts screaming at him about his negligence towards his children, about his stupid obsession with his work, and the fact that he was wearing the suit made her even more angry. She began slapping at him and tearing things off of his desk, and Afton, in a desperate attempt to save his work, and also admittedly with anger in his heart, swung to hit her to get her to stop. But he was so used to being in the suit that he had forgotten he was wearing it. The metal arm of the suit clanged against his wife's skull, knocking her out instantly. A pool of blood began to seep out from where she lies still on the floor. In a panic, Afton picked her up and carried her to the backyard. He couldn't go to jail. He couldn't lose his chance to prove himself superior to that overachiever Henry. He had to get rid of her. He was truly devastated that his wife was gone, but if he didn't do this, his life's work would be over. Everything he worked for would be over. His dreams destroyed. So he buried her in that plot of land behind his house. It was supposed to rain later that night anyway, and he hoped that maybe that would cover some of the tracks. He didn't even take off the suit the whole time. He was so in shock from the events that had just happened that he didn't even register that he was still wearing it. His youngest son ran up to where he was burying the child's mother. The child was so distraught, asking what he had done. He sat at his mother's makeshift grave while his father, still dressed as Spring Bonnie, buried his mother. William told him to go home, and the child argued for a moment, but William screamed at him and the son ran home in fear. William followed shortly behind, but stopped for a moment as he watched his son through the window, crying his heart out. This was all Henry's fault, he would think to himself. His wife was gone because of him. After all, it was Henry's fault that he needed to push so hard to be the best. When William got home, his son Michael was sitting in the living room chair, trying to just distract himself from the things that he had heard in the other room. He told his oldest son, Michael, to watch after his youngest. His daughter wasn't home that night. William couldn't remember if she was visiting friends or family, or maybe she had gone back to that damned restaurant. Before he left, he told his crying child not to close his door. After all, his brother needed to watch him. William took off the suit and drove to the nearest bar to drink his emotions away. He didn't want to feel all the things he was feeling right now. Eventually, William gets kicked out of the bar. Despite Afton's protesting, the man in the green shirt kept denying him access. So he got into his car for a drive. The rain had started to hit pretty hard, but Afton needed to go somewhere. He couldn't sit still with all of his misery and rage eating him alive. So, as if he was on autopilot, he went to the recently opened sister location that Henry had set up after Fredbear's success. As William drove by, he noticed something interesting. Henry's daughter was locked outside. A devious grin stretched across his face. It was time to make things even between them. Henry would pay for the grief he had caused the Afton family. So right there on that rainy night at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, he killed Charlotte Emily in cold blood, Henry's only daughter. William peeled away from the location, feeling better than ever. He was on a high, still angry, but also feeling relieved and even proud of what he had just done. In his rearview mirror, he could see the security puppet desperately attempting to find the child. Stupid puppet had no idea it was malfunctioning in the rain. Before he got home, he tried one more time to get into the bar, to no avail. At the Afton house, Michael was still blankly watching his favorite show. Michael had heard the yelling, but had no idea what had happened. He just assumed his brother had just witnessed his parents fighting like they did from time to time. William walked over to Michael to ask where his youngest was, and Michael told him, "Leave him alone tonight. He had a rough day." This angered William. Who was Michael to tell him what to do? What did he think he was going to do? Hurt him? That's ridiculous. It really wasn't that big of a deal, but William was already angry about his wife, about Henry, about his removal from the bar, and now this? Whatever, William thought to himself. He walks up to his youngest child's room, and the door was closed and locked. "I told you not to close your door," he said as calmly as he could muster. He received no answer. At first, William walked away. Maybe Michael was right. Maybe now wasn't the time, but he couldn't shake this drunken rage that he felt. This was it. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. William had had enough. "This is my house. He can't ignore me like that," he said, his anger reaching a crescendo. He stormed back over to the door, and this time he yelled, "Open the door!" He pounded on the door with so much force. And still, no answer. He could have kicked the door down, but Afton had a sneaking suspicion. "I'll find a way in from outside," he told himself. He walked around the outside of his house only to find a broken window and muddy footprints leading towards the makeshift grave he had made earlier that night. He also noticed his animatronic rabbit footprints still there from when he was standing outside watching his son mourn through the window. Ran off to that place again. He'll be sorry when he gets back. Not only had his son disobeyed him about the door, but he had smashed his window to get away from him and went back to the place William had explicitly told him not to go back to by himself. Well, that's it. I'm gonna be real with you. I'm not sure that I like that answer either, but I was faced with a couple problems, and the first one being fairly obvious, which is, what is that mound behind the house? The crying child's still alive, and we know Michael's still alive. I'm pretty sure at this point, Elizabeth's still alive because we know that Charlie is the first one to die. We know this. That was the catalyst that caused everything else. So there's no explanation for there being a grave back there. A lot of people will tell you that maybe these are the Funtime animatronics, behaving sort of like the twisted animatronics in the Silver Eyes. But there's no real reason for the Funtimes to have been created this early in the timeline, because at a certain point you have to ask yourself, why is William killing children? And I think a emotionally and irrationally motivated crime makes a lot more sense to me, personally. And you can feel free to disagree, but I don't think the Funtimes have any reason to exist right now, except for maybe Ballora as a way to honor his wife. Also, a lot of people wonder how the person sitting in the living room is Michael. And a lot of people think, well, couldn't that be Mrs. Afton? And to that, I would say yes, it very well could be. But in this series, we have a big importance placed on colors. And not only is the character's shirt or blanket or whatever that is gray, but their text is gray also. And not just gray, but Michael gray. I think that's Michael. And I think that would make a lot of sense in the scenario in which that the mother was gone in some way. It would also give William more of a reason to kill Charlotte. There's no real reason for William to kill Charlie other than anger at Henry, and at this point, I don't think he really had that much built up. He was obsessed, sure, and he wanted to make his animatronic building better, he wanted to make his devices better, his engineering better, but I don't think he would have stooped to that level just yet. Now, when it comes to having this all happen when it is, the reason I say Charlie is killed at a sister location to Fredbear's is that we know from this coin that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, specifically, not Fredbear's Family Diner, but Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, has been in operation since 1983. You can also tell by the fact that we know that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza's roster, which is, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, we know that they are in existence at the time that Fredbear's Family Diner is running. We know this because of the FNAF 4 minigames. Not only does the Crying Child have plushies of these characters in his room, but also in the minigame where the bite happens, the bullies are wearing the masks of the characters. What I can glean from that is after the success of Fredbear's Family Diner, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was opened. Then, of course, the tragedy with Charlie happened, and the restaurant at some point was closed down, reopened as the FNAF 2 location, which was then again closed down, and then they made a different location named Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, which is the location we see in FNAF 1. These are all assumptions that I've made based on a timeline that I have pieced together. But I think that this explanation of Midnight Motorist makes sense. This is really the beginning of the important part of FNAF, which is, the murders and the reasoning behind them and the aftermath. I know it's a lot to take in, and I know it's probably more than a lot of people are willing to accept. But I think this is a better answer than just a divorce. I guess I could kind of see it, but wouldn't make a lot of sense. Now, I will say, to argue for the point of Mrs. Afton just being gone and not dead, it would also explain where Elizabeth is. Because Elizabeth's not in that house that night. She's just not there. And if they're divorced, it would make sense that Elizabeth is, at her mother's house, and Michael is, disillusioned and a bit cynical over, his dad coming home angry and bitter and things like that. But on the flip side, I could also argue that maybe Elizabeth was at Fredbear's, or maybe Elizabeth was at a friend's or another family member's, or maybe Elizabeth is just there and we don't see her, because we know that this house is bigger than we're being shown in Midnight Motorist. This was the best way I could make sense of it. I'm gonna be completely honest with you. I wanted to explain why there's animatronic footprints outside the window, where the Crying Child would be running to, because I am of the opinion that Junior's is a bar, and it doesn't make sense for the crying child to be running there. I think that this gives a decent answer for both, and it wouldn't really break a lot of things in terms of consistency. Although, now that I've gotten beyond my little story time that I've been enjoying, telling you guys, I can tell you guys to catch me in the next one, because I'm going to go more into detail about the timeline that I've set up, what order I think these events happen, and what makes sense to me. And if you're interested in that, subscribe, I guess. And I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.